guys, welcome back to Counseling Confidential. My name is Claudia Wigger.
And I'm Jessica Stewart.
And today we are on part 2 of our stress series. So if you missed it last week, pop onto our YouTube channel and then watch the one from last week. But this week we're going to be focusing on mindfulness and kind of different grounding techniques and how to kind of manage our stress a little bit better. Last week we talked a lot about toxic stress, good stress, and what those look like. And so now we're going to talk a little bit more about managing them. So mindfulness, so we'll start with that. So defining mindfulness in a way is, it's a tool that you can use that helps shift your attention away from the stress and anxiety that you're experiencing. So instead of really honing in on it and focusing on it and letting it kind of consume you, you're finding techniques to kind of get your mind off of it and kind of reduce and ease some of that stress. It takes a lot of practice, I think, a little bit to really make it quick and efficient, but definitely the first time you do it, you're gonna notice a little bit of a difference within your anxiety and your stress.
Yeah, mindfulness is a practice that you can do even when you're not stressed, and the more you do it when you're not stressed, actually the easier it is to implement when you're experiencing stress. And it's good for good stress and toxic stress. It just helps you regulate your mind and body and keep you focused on what you need.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a big piece of it is the senses, right? So that's what you really use to ground yourself. So we're probably all familiar with the senses, but we'll go through them. So touch, smell, taste, sight, and sound. So go ahead.
So it does not matter what activity you choose to do as long as it's brief. You can do it every day, and it provides you with the opportunity to pay attention to the 5 senses. So it's really about bringing yourself back into this moment rather than kind of being in the ether of your thoughts and feelings.
Okay. So we're going to demonstrate actually a quick activity. A lot of you might already be familiar with this. It's one that we teach a lot of our students on a daily basis. But it's looking around the room and kind of honing in on what each sense is in the room. So for example, we're going to do it for you. So touch. So if I'm feeling really anxious and stressed and I'm sitting exactly where I'm sitting right now, right? And I'm okay, I can feel the wood, I can feel the chair I'm sitting in. It's a little softer, my back is resting. If you want to add anything to it.
Yeah, I can feel my feet on the floor. Anything that's kind of bring my awareness to my body and the experience I have right now. And you kind of list 5 things that you can touch. And then you would go through 4 things that you can see. So for me, I see the student, you guys can't see this, but the students that are in the room with us right now, I see the posters on the wall. I see Miss Wigger here in the room with me. And you just continue to do that through the 5 senses.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty good way, it's a good way to do it in the classroom, because you can do it silently without anyone realizing what you're doing. It's less obvious than any sort of physical activity to reduce it.
And it's really quick and it just grounds you in the moment. The other thing you can really do any kind of mindfulness anytime during your day. So one of the examples that we were using with touch was when you wash dishes. You can focus on all the elements of washing those dishes and it's going to bring you back into the moment. You can think about how the water feels on your hands or how the soap is kind of bubbling up all over. And so you just focus on that activity that's kind of in the present moment and it kind of gets you back centered. Now, if washing dishes isn't your thing, that's totally fine. Maybe listening to music is something that kind of grounds you. And so you focus on what that music sounds like, all the instruments that are there, the lyrics that are there. It's really about you taking your focus and putting it on the thing you're actually doing in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just gotta kind of find your thing. Yeah. Okay, the next kind of portion that we're going to slide into, these are all obviously connected, are worry thoughts. So how to understand worry thoughts. So those come along with our stress and anxiety. So it's exactly what it is. It's you're feeling stressed, you're feeling anxious, and then all of a sudden your brain starts telling you all these things to worry about, and some of the things may be true, some of the things may not be true. So for example, if you're feeling worried that there's a test coming up and you feel like you're going to fail it, so the bigger fear, the fear is that you'll fail the test, right? And then the bigger fear is if I fail the test, then I might fail the class, then I won't graduate, then I might not be eligible to go to college, and then we start spinning and spiraling in that a little bit. So it's all about recognizing your worry thoughts. So when you're feeling that anxiety and you have those thoughts going through your mind, and you're oh, okay, what am I worrying about? What scenarios am I playing out in my head? And there's 2 questions you want to ask, right?
So for every worry thought, for every worry that comes into your awareness, if you know that you're worried about the test that's coming up, for instance, you really want to ask yourself 2 questions. If the thing I'm worrying about happened, what would be so bad about that? And some of you are like, oh my gosh, it would be so bad. But really think through what would not be ideal about that situation. And then ask yourself, what will happen if that fear comes true? Now, we tend to think that things are going to be way worse than they actually are. So actually reflecting on this and maybe even writing it out is really helpful so that we can take more of an unbiased look at what that worry is and what the thoughts that are coming along with it are. And then when we look at it, we can remind ourselves that number one, yes, we tend to make things, or we tend to imagine things worse than they actually end up being. And then 2, what we also do is we don't remember that we have actually had things happen before and we got through them. Like we've had things go the worst way that we could imagine them, and then we were resilient enough to get through it. So we forget that. We forget that we're capable of doing hard things, and we also forget that things tend to not be as bad as we think they are, which kind of leads us to, once we've kind of got our worry and the thoughts that go along with that, going into looking at them and seeing if we're making some of these thinking mistakes. So thinking mistakes are kind of like we kind of jump on a train and we don't get off that train. So one of the things that we do is we jump to conclusions. So this would be like when you're feeling anxious, stressed, or worried, and your mind starts to jump to conclusions that are pretty scary. For example, you'd be jumping to the conclusion that if you conclude that a friend who didn't respond to a text message was then like doesn't like you anymore, like, oh my gosh, it's been 5 whole minutes and they must not like me anymore. So that would be jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, we're probably familiar with the tunnel vision too. So like you get in that mindset, right? And like all you can see is all the bad stuff or the worst things that you can imagine happening, and it's like you can't escape it almost. So that is like an example of that is like you're on the soccer team, right? So the other team scores 3 goals against you in the first game as the goalie on the varsity soccer team, let's say, okay? And you might start to look through the tunnel like, oh my gosh, like they've scored 3 goals on me, they're just gonna keep scoring on me, and you're gonna be in that mindset. And potentially when you're in that mindset, sometimes that ends up just happening. So making sure that you're being aware of like a mindset that's singular, that's like negative, because that can probably be related.
Yeah,
to
like you're not considering the other possibilities. You're just on this train, having this tunnel vision.
You're on the wrong train.
Yeah. Another one is mind reading, which I am really prone to do. But this is when you feel anxious. This is when you feel anxious and you believe that you know that what someone else is thinking. Man, I know what they're thinking. They're thinking all of these things. The mind reading, that's mind reading. So you assume that your teammates think you're a terrible shortstop because you made an error in the last inning, or you assume that your friends think you're a terrible friend because you weren't super thoughtful or gave them like a thank you note for that last thing, when in fact they were just glad to give you the thing, and they don't expect any of those things. So mind reading is also one of those things that we can kind of get on that train and not get off.
And I think a big piece with all of these is like finding the evidence in it, right? So like if you're having these thoughts like, what evidence do I have that my teammates think that about me? Typically there's probably no evidence about it. It's just your brain like thinking about it and coming up with it. So just kind of doing things like that.
So really all of this is to make you more mindful of kind of what your internal world looks like, and then bringing you back into the present moment. So being aware and reflecting on these things is helpful, and then finding ways to ground yourself and be back in this present moment, and that's how we manage our stress.
Yeah, it's great. We have a couple worksheets too. So if you all are interested in practicing this, it can be really difficult if you've been in the tunnel vision, jumping to conclusions and mind reading kind of mindset for a while. So sometimes you just kind of have to practice with scenarios that aren't necessarily your own, right? So we have 2 worksheets. So let's try and see which ones we have. So we have the worry thought one. So that's when we were talking about all the worry thoughts and asking yourself those 2 questions, like what do you think will really happen with these? And you'll see them up on the screen, but they're just a situation and then a worry thought, and just kind of filling those out.
So you identify the situation and then your worry thoughts that go along with them, and then you can ask yourself those 2 questions afterwards.
Yes, exactly. And then the second one we have is the thinking mistakes. So that will give you it'll give you a thought, and then you answer like, is this a thinking mistake, yes or no? And then you would say what type of thinking mistake. So between the jumping to conclusions, tunnel vision, or mind reading. So it just kind of makes you more like self-aware.
Yeah, because these are skills. Like this is like a changing, it's not, I think sometimes we get a little overwhelmed with some of these things. It's just like, well, how am I going to change? They're like, these are skills. You can learn them. And so practicing them really helps.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Okay, well that's all we have for you guys today. And we'll be back next week or the week after, I think, for part 3. So be on the lookout. It'll be very exciting right before tests, get you all prepared for those midterms. All right, Cougars, and as always, we see you.
We hear you.
And we respect you.